Hello, everybody. We're slowly letting people in from the waiting room, and looks like we've got a couple more popping on. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this Tuesday at lunchtime, at least here on the West Coast. I'm seeing some familiar faces that tend to join us from Iowa City or from the Iowa area and from other parts of the country. So thank you for joining our chapter this month. My name is Jessica Morgan. I will be the host today. I am joined by Julie Fisher. She will be monitoring the chat box for questions as they come in, and either leading our Q&A at the end of the session or interrupting our speakers for today. You're joining us for speech or talk. Know your audience, know the difference. Before we begin, I've got a couple of housekeeping items. We have two upcoming events. Our February Lunch and Learn is our reschedule from our November workshop. It's titled From Data to Drama. This will be a Google Analytics workshop. So once we get started, I'm going to go ahead and put that URL in the chat box so that you guys can go ahead and register. And then starting in March, we will be beginning a 3-part series on AI. Check your inbox. The first event will be on March 19th. Our plan is for these to all kind of coincide together and culminate with a hopefully an in-person or hybrid workshop. So check your inbox for more details. Today we are joined by two lovely individuals. One represents traditional media and thoughtful, well-planned speeches. The other represents the TEDx perspective, presenting well-formed ideas in talks under 18 minutes. They are both executive coaches who have worked with C-suite and knowledge workers in helping them prepare for effective communication of their ideas. We're joined with Catherine Brennick. She is an Emmy award-winning VP at Spring Green Communications. Catherine is an accomplished public relations specialist, communication trainer, media manager, and television producer. She has more than 20 years of experience and a proven record of growing brands and engaging target audience through content development for traditional and social media. She worked for CNN, Headline News, Turner Broadcasting's True TV, and is a professor at the University of North Georgia, where she teaches public speaking and journalism. She holds a certificate in diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace from the University of South Florida. And our other panelist today is Sandy Lamb. She is an international TEDx speaker, coach, and CEO and best-selling author. Sandy has a passion for professional speaking and has traveled the world to deliver her message on emotional intelligence to virtual and live stages in Indonesia, Thailand, Canada, and the US. She has coached 25 people to land their TEDx dream stage in both the US and in Italy. Sandy's career spans from a global private engineering construction firm to the Department of Defense. In 2023, Sandy became a #1 international best-selling author in her book, Cracking the Rich Code, Volume 10, and is an advocate for supporting girls and women in STEM. A reminder for you all that today's session will be recorded and available to all attendees. Our guests have provided us with some speaking tips as well, so keep an eye on your inbox for this helpful information. And here is a request of all of you attendees, because this is a public speaking seminar. Our speakers have requested that you turn your cameras on. So for those of you on the West Coast that are joining us over lunch, we won't mind if you're eating your lunch while you're watching. We understand it's noon and it's a lunch and learn. So thank you all for joining us. And again, Julie is monitoring our chat box, so feel free to chat your questions as they come. Now, both of you, this is Sandy and Catherine, both of you are speaker coaches. Catherine, you coach executives and SMEs, and Sandy, in addition to coaching executives, you're a TEDx coach. Your similarities lie in encouraging speakers to tailor their audience. Catherine, would you please provide an overview of the approach you take in identifying your audience and helping your SME or executive deliver their message?
Absolutely. And thanks to everybody for being here today. We're really excited to join you. And thank you so much for turning on your cameras. It really helps us feel like we're talking to human beings. So, this is very timely because I happen to be working on a speech right now for the CEO of a company who's delivering a keynote at a conference in March. And so I was like, oh, great, this is perfect. I'll just think about everything I'm doing now, and that's what I'll tell everybody. So, questions. I ask a ton of questions. So when the communicator came to me and said, hey, we need you to write the CEO speech, I said, who's it for? When is it? How long? All of those things. And then I start digging online and look at who the attendees are, who are the sponsors of the event, what do they anticipate the attendance will be, what's it been like in the past. If there are photos, I'll dig through those, just to sort of get a sense of who's actually going to be in the room. And then, of course, I think about secondary audiences and encourage the speakers to do so as well. Will this live online? Will you have access to post it on your LinkedIn or somewhere else? And what do those audiences want to hear? And then, of course, because this is a client that is a regular client, I already know what the messaging is. I know what they want to talk about. And so finally today, after working on this for a week, I had that aha moment, and I was like, there's the connection between the people and the message, and pull it together like that. And all of that is done in constant communication with the client. And truthfully, the CEO who's going to be delivering this, he's not going to see it until probably a week before he gives it. But but he'll be fine. We actually wrote his first speech ever as CEO, and they're like, wow, you really captured his voice. And I was like, that was pure luck.
It's always a win when you capture their voice.
Mm-hmm.
So in addition to the questions, do you mind sharing what that aha moment was? Or is that something you need to hide until the speech in March?
No, I don't think any of you will be at a chemical engineer conference. I certainly
My
won't be.
spare time.
Their focus is safety. And of course, for any company with a lot of engineers, they're going to be focused on safety too. Safety, challenge, change. Those were the themes that came up through my discussion with the client and through my research on the organization and their members. And so I just hit on this moment of, oh, the company's been going through this change and facing these challenges, and I can just dovetail. And really, it was word choice. It was about how do we turn challenge into opportunity and create change. So it wasn't like a thing like, ooh, dogs, but it was just, oh, if I start tweaking these words throughout and find that narrative thread, it'll start to actually be a cohesive 25-minute speech rather than just talking points.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah. Sandy, I know with your approach as a TEDx coach, is your approach different simply by the nature of your clients' needs? And if so, how does it differ? And would you mind explaining what you see as the difference between a traditional speech and a TED Talk?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. And thanks all of you for showing up and being on camera. Like Catherine said, it definitely helps to see some smiling faces on the other end rather than talking to a black box. I actually just had an aha moment, believe it or not, when Catherine was talking. And it occurs to me that one of the biggest questions that I ask my speakers, not necessarily my TEDx speakers, but my speakers, is who their target audience is. And we're going to talk about that. But when you're a TEDx speaker, your target audience is the world. Once your talk goes live and gets on the TED website and the YouTube site, it will be seen by anyone and everyone. So it's really hard to hone in on who your target audience is. When I work with TEDx speakers in particular, I've been a member of Toastmasters myself, and I've given a number of presentations, and spoken at a number of women's technical conferences. And so I say the questions that I ask you are, number one is, what do you actually want to say? And I keep bringing you back to that over and over and over again. And number two is, how do you want the audience to feel after you've delivered your talk? If I have members, and I have had many members of Toastmasters in my mastermind group that I run for TEDx, I have to do a bit of unwiring, because when you talk about delivering a speech, I don't know about you, but here's the connotation I have. Someone up at a podium, right, with a microphone and maybe a teleprompter, which we're going to talk about it in a minute, and they have memorized their script, or they're reading from a teleprompter. It seems very formal to me. There's probably some slides with like a lot of data and graphs and 1,000 words all over it, which we're going to talk about as well. But when I talk about giving a TEDx talk, I am picturing someone on their living room couch having a conversation. So it's very interactive from that perspective. It's much less structured. And the words that I use are that you need to embody your message rather than memorize it. So it's embodiment over memorization. So that to me is the biggest difference between a speech and a talk, or a presentation for that matter.
Wonderful. And you just alluded to our next question here regarding not being a fan of teleprompters or even fully written speeches. What do you recommend instead? And what are a few techniques our webinar attendees should consider using?
Yeah, so number one rule, if you're in my TEDx mastermind, is you don't do any writing until you outline your talk. So we have to get clarity around your one big idea. That's the biggest thing. Most people don't get accepted to get on the TEDx stage because they don't have clarity around their one big idea. Once you get to that clarity around your one big idea, for my TEDx speakers, I recommend three supporting points. So we outline their talk, start to finish, bullets, not sentences, not paragraphs, bullets. And then those supporting points become the things where they start to embed their personal stories and some of their own experiences into that. Again, it comes down to practice, which I know Catherine's going to talk about. Practice, 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 and the importance of that is really important. But again, the biggest thing is that you have to be speaking from your heart and not from your head. Number one, know that nobody in the audience, and this is true anywhere you speak, nobody in the audience has any idea what you're going to say. This is another reason for using those slides, because they don't see slides, they don't know. My TEDx speakers have one slide, if that max. Most of them have no slides. They don't know what you're going to say. So if you forget something, we don't want to know that you forgot it. You got to keep on moving. So if you embody that message, somebody gave me a tip once, which I thought was a great one. So the 3 supporting points when you've outlined your talk, you write them in like bulleted format on an index card. And then you place those index cards 3 different places in your living room. And you walk up to that first one and you pick up the supporting point and you talk as long as you can on that one point. And then you go to the next one and do the same. And so for me, it's not about teleprompters and reading, because what makes for an excellent speaker or an epic speaker is somebody who can connect with the audience emotionally. And when I'm reading and teleprompting and have slides and everything behind me, there's no connection.
Absolutely. And as we promised in the promos, we did say there might be some differences in opinion here. And I know, Catherine, you are obviously preparing an executive for a presentation at a conference coming up. This is the same question to you. What are your thoughts on the use of teleprompters and notes? And what are your recommendations, including a few tips for today's group?
So as a former TV person, I was a reporter. I've been a producer. I've been a TV executive. I love teleprompters and notes, right? Like that's my thing. Mostly because as a reporter and from a journalistic standpoint, you've got to get it right. So if the number is 1,342, you write that down and you make sure you glance at that and don't get it wrong. So, you know, after 25 years in news, I I'm hardwired now at this point to have notes. I have notes today, even though I know what I'm going to say. I have notes. But I will say, instead of disagreeing with Sandy, I really agree with everything she said. And with my university students, I do tell them memorization is not the goal. It is a step you need to get to. I say internalization, to where you can, again, we don't know, the audience doesn't know what you're going to say. So if you say banana instead of fruit, keep rolling. And if you've internalized rather than memorized, you're good to go. But if you've ever heard anybody get stuck in a speech where they're like, there are 3 things you need to know. 3 things you need to know. 3 things. If they are repeating, that means they only memorized. And they can't go forward until their brain remembers that next word. So, like Sandy, I believe more practice, internalize it, know what you're going to say. So teleprompters, yes, this executive will not have a prompter at the event he's going to. I do know he'll have notes. He's not going to memorize a 25-minute speech. Absolutely not. You know, unlike that first speech we wrote for him where we'd never talked to him, never met him, he'd never really said a lot publicly, and we sort of made up his voice for him. We know his voice now because we helped him create it. And so in that sense, I know what he's going to say. I know what kind of anecdotes to use. So he doesn't have to memorize it. He's going to probably read it 2 or 3 times. He's good about sticking to script. He's going to have a printout and he's going to flip pages. And I think that's okay in certain circumstances. I do believe in being conversational and connecting. And that was another key word that Sandy used, is connection. This is all about connection. Communication is connection. If you're not finding something the audience can gravitate toward and grab onto, then you're not doing your job as a communicator, as a person giving a speech or a talk. So I would say my recommendations are, if you're doing a speech yourself or you're having to prep somebody for a speech, get them to practice as much as you can so that they can internalize the message. If they want to use notes or a teleprompter, they need to practice with notes or a teleprompter. It can't be their first time using a prompter out there in front of thousands of people. It's just not going to work.
I didn't read it fast enough.
Right. It's muscle memory, just as anything else that we have to practice and perform. Speaking in public is muscle memory.
Absolutely.
And some people can improv better than others. Sandy, I saw that you had something to add.
I just have a funny teleprompter story that I just thought of. When I did TEDx Franklin last year, was it 2022? I believe it was. I had a speaker who was giving his first ever TED talk at the age of 82, at the young age of 82. And they wanted to give him a teleprompter. And I was like, Lord, no, like this person wouldn't have a clue as to how to use it. And I don't want him to have it on the TEDx stage at 82 for the very first time. Right. The other thing that I wanted to point out and why it's good to have the different perspectives is, keep in mind, if you don't know the rules of TEDx, it's a maximum of 18 minutes, you know, and the sweet spot for my TEDx speakers is about 10 to 12 minutes. So I can pretty much get along without slides and memorization for 10 to 12 minutes. But if I'm giving a CEO and I'm giving a formal presentation of 45 minutes, then there's probably going to be some slides and notes involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And this wasn't on the list of questions that we discussed, but one came to mind. When you're preparing notes, I personally tend to bold certain words that need to stand out on the page when I'm asking questions or I'm trying to get a point across. Do you have any tips or structures that you recommend your clients use? Is it bullet points? Is it bolding? What do you recommend? Catherine?
Yeah, I don't recommend writing paragraphs for sure. If anything, it's bullets, and I do tend to use a highlighter
Okay.
if they're handwritten, or even if it's typed up, I'll use a highlighter to make sure that I hit some high points.
Wonderful. Catherine, how about you?
Agree. I think you should always mark your script. And whether that's, you know, a speaking outline or whatever you're comfortable with, highlight, bold, italicize, put a happy face on there. If this is the part where I'm supposed to smile, go ahead. I had an anchor who used to put happy face on the happy stories and a sad face on the sad stories. But it worked, and people felt like really connected to her because she showed emotion at the right time. So you want to do that.
Getting Ron Burgundy vibes from that one, Catherine. I love it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, she was
Unless you have the teleprompter on and it says insert smile here and you read that.
yeah.
Then it may
I've
not
never
be as
put that in
effective.
anybody's prompter, but
I love it. I love it. Never a boring moment, everyone who's joining us from around the country over here in the Mid-Columbia chapter. So let's talk about body language, presentation aids, and a bit on in-person versus virtual. We will rapid fire through these topics, and we'll go back and forth between the two of you. We'll go Sandy and then Catherine. That'll be the order on these. So rapid fire question number 1. We kind of know the answer to this one already, but use slides, yes or no, and under what circumstances are they appropriate?
Well, I'm going to share a brilliant quote from my dear friend Lori Robertson that said, "Slides are like children. You can have as many as you want, but you have to learn how to manage them effectively." So your slides are kind of to help. They should be to help your audience or to add to your message, but not necessarily serve as your teleprompter. I like slides in limited use with photographs. I just did a couple of TEDx style talks at a women's conference, and there was just some really heartfelt, beautiful photographs throughout, and it just helped to tell a story. So not a lot of words if I'm going to use them. And keep in mind that if you're adding slides, that adds a little bit of tech, and you kind of have to have a plan B for what if you run into technical difficulties as well.
Got it. Catherine, how about you? Slides, yes or no?
yes. Yeah, not every time, all the time, but I do think the visual adds to it. Now, I'm also a real stickler for the amount of information on a slide, and that you should never put your whole bullet point list on that slide. Bullet points one at a time as you bring them in as supporting material. Again, this comes from my TV background, and the adage that I will share with you: say dog, see dog. If I'm talking about a dog, let me show you a dog. If I'm showing you a dog, I better be talking about a dog. They should work hand in hand. So you want to be judicious. Anne Wiley, as I'm sure many of you in PRSA are familiar, I went to one of her trainings and she used more slides than anyone I've ever seen in my life. And it was amazing. So like Sandy said, she had a ton of children, but she managed them really well. And it was good.
Wonderful. So Sandy, back to you. What are your top 2 or 3 body language recommendations for an in-person presentation?
Yeah, you'll see when I send out when you send out my tips and tricks that it surprises some people to know that in communication, the overall message, about 55% of that message, and almost 90% when you include voice and tone, is your overall message, versus less than 10% are the actual words that are coming out of your mouth. So nonverbals are just as important, if not more important, than the actual words. I would say eye contact is really important in terms of demonstrating connection, in terms of demonstrating that you're actually listening, and also tone. Tone can be really important, and the use of what I'll call the pregnant pause. Because if I stop talking, then all of a sudden everybody looks up.
Well done. That was a good pause. Catherine, how about you? What are your top 2 to 3 body language recommendations?
Well, I will underscore eye contact. And for some people, that freaks them out when they're presenting. So they can you don't have to actually eye contact everyone. You just have to look like you are. Look at their foreheads, the top of their heads, the person, the friendly faces in the audience. But as long as you look like you're doing that, that's all you need. The other thing that I think is really key is that authenticity is something we all sense. We can't always pinpoint it. And I had a client once, and the ask of me was, we don't know what's wrong, but everyone hates listening to her speak. They think she's awkward, but they don't know why. And I was like, oh, fantastic. I could fix that, having no clue what the problem is with this gal's presentations. Well, I got there. She was a normal human being. And then I said, give me your last presentation. And she's like, you're not going to understand it. I'm like, I don't have to understand it. I just want to see you present. So she stands there and she starts doing it. And I wish that I could stand up in front of you right now. She was not moving. It was as if somehow she'd been paralyzed from the chin down. And the only thing moving was her mouth. And I was like, what are you doing? And come to find out, she thought, well, if I use my hands, I talk with my hands, but if I do that, it's distracting. Instead, what was distracting was that she was clearly fighting against using her hands. And so everybody was like, what is wrong with her? So I would say, be you. If you talk with your hands, talk with your hands. If you don't.
Wonderful.
And the other thing is record yourself practicing. I'm not a big fan of hide behind the podium. So move around, think of a pattern to walk in or something like that. Record yourself. See if you do anything funny, twitchy, weird. Do you swing your leg? Do you twist? Do you sway? All of those things are just energy that is going to come out. So you need to find a useful way to use that energy, whether that's talk with your hands, move around a little bit, interact with the screen if you're using slides, interact with the audience if it's a more small setting. That was a really long couple of tips. I'm sorry.
I just want to
rapid fire these.
I know. I just want to add one comment because I think this is really important that you were talking about. When I'm at an in-person presentation, I really want to engage with the audience and I want to use the stage. When I am delivering a TEDx talk, I encourage my speakers to stay put on that red dot, right? You're not doing a whole lot of gesturing and you're certainly not walking off of the dot because there's filming and everything else going on, but you don't like too much of that is very distracting and then they're really not going to hear your talk.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So I've got 2 more in this rapid fire session so that I'd like to leave some time for Q&A at the end. So you both just talked about in-person body language. Real quick, how would you alter that for a virtual setting like the one that we're in? Sandy,
well, Jessica, let me tell you what I do. So the use of the pregnant pause is really good, actually, when you are delivering a talk virtually. But the other thing, because my area of expertise, as you heard at the beginning, is emotional intelligence and empathy. So one of the tips that I give my clients around social awareness is the use of people's names. So when you are either presenting on a stage or if you're having a conversation with somebody and all of a sudden I say, well, Julie, thanks for asking. And I acknowledge somebody by using their name. Number one, it helps me to learn people's names. But number two, it helps you to demonstrate that they're being seen and heard. And you'd be amazed at the impact that can have when you use a person's name. So that's just a tip that I use virtually.
Wonderful. Catherine, same question to you.
Yeah, body language wise, I really just feel like it takes a whole lot more energy to come through a screen than it does to come through in person. So just know you'll be more tired after presenting in a virtual format than you would be. Even if you're, I leave it all on the field kind of person in person, you're going to leave it all on the field and then some in a virtual situation. Because it's 2-dimensional and you've got to really push to bring yourself to life for people on the other side. And I love what Sandy said about using people's names and trying to, just like you would manage any conversation in real life, weave things together. If Peggy makes a point and then Lillian adds to it, and then you're going to add to it, mentioning Peggy and Lillian and that matters.
Absolutely. So while we're still on the virtual interaction of speeches and talks, what is one tool or piece of tech that you can use in a virtual setting to help engage your audience? Sandy, that's to you.
Sorry.
And we can combine that with the next question if we want to.
I had
So,
to unmute.
go ahead.
Oh, the tech tools, that's where we're at, right?
Yep.
I'm gonna have Julie put into the chat as I'm talking one of the tools that I discovered that is amazing for speakers, and I've used it a couple times already this year, is a program called Talkadot. They have a free app, and she's put in the chat exactly what I put in my chat or put up on screen when I'm delivering my talks. There's a QR code. All you need to do is take your phone, scan that QR code, and type in TEDx, all caps, TEDx, and it will immediately take you to fill out a 2 to 3 minute brief survey that says, you know, what kind of a job we did for you today, whether or not you'd want to hear us again or recommend. And I instantly get that feedback as a speaker. I'm able to share it with the people that invited me to speak so that they can get that immediate feedback. And in return, I usually do a giveaway. In this case, I'm going to offer 10% off if anyone's interested in giving a TEDx talk and joining the mastermind. If you fill this out for me and are interested, I'll give you 10% off my next mastermind. So it's a simple and easy way to just get immediate feedback, to even get referrals for other speaking engagements. And it's a easy to use tool and does not take a lot of time.
Wonderful.
Thank
I
you.
love seeing everybody stick their phone up to their screen as they're watching.
Yes,
their
I
laptop.
appreciate it.
So Catherine, same question to you. Do you have any tech or tools to help engage in virtual talks? And are there tech tools that everyone should be using when they're giving a presentation?
You know, as far as engaging in these kind of presentations, I don't have any favorites. I will say my favorite tech tools are, oh, look how with my blurred background. The phone and the iPad are my favorite tech tools for any kind of prep, like record yourself. Have other humans record you and tell you how you did. And, you know, you want your honest friend, not your friend who's like, oh my gosh, everything you do is precious and you're beautiful, which that's great. Like invite that friend too, but have the friend who's like, you are precious and beautiful, but also stop saying, or whatever. Those are non-tech.
I have a funny story about that my father scarred me forever practicing a 7th grade speech to him, and he goes, honey, every time you say I hear you say the word dumb. You sound so dumb when you say and I go, oh, killed my 7th grade little heart, but it's stuck with me all these years later.
Oh.
It was awful. So Julie, I saw someone popped in the chat box with a question. Do you mind hopping in and asking that question?
You bet. We've actually got quite a few here, so I will let me scroll up here. Some great questions. And
while she's scrolling, if I can pop in, there are a couple of apps I can send you, Jessica, if you want to share a couple of teleprompter apps. Of course, if you Google best teleprompter apps, they're probably going to come up, but I can send them. And then Udly is another one. It's an AI public speaking coach. And Sandy mentioned Toastmasters, and I know that Toastmasters has a deal with Udly where they use it, but it's kind of cool because you can enable it on Zoom. And it can coach you during a Zoom call, which is kind of neat.
Perfect. Go ahead, Julie. I know if we can get 2 or 3 in now and then save some of the big ones for the end.
You bet. Yeah, one here. So Sandy, this may be more for you, but the question is does anybody else speak freely, record it, transcribe it, and then put it into ChatGPT to see what IT thought their 3 main points were when you had talked about outlining your 3 main points? Have you tried that?
Oh, yeah, I've actually used ChatGPT myself to prepare some online training that I'm beginning to do. So, but I have not used that. I was actually on a call, and come to think of it, I was on a call coaching one of my speakers, and we were talking about the feminine and the masculine. And she said, well, there's really no definition. And I was like, come on. And I got into ChatGPT and I said, please define feminine and masculine energy, and boom, like paragraphs of it. So yeah, I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole on AI. I don't feel like I'm competing with a robot. I feel like I'm collaborating with one, right? So use it to the extent that it helps make you a better speaker or presenter or whatever.
Thanks.
Wonderful.
Catherine, did you want to comment on that?
I agree. I think AI is a tool, just like spell check or Grammarly or any other kind of thing. Are there dangers? Absolutely. Should you just put your topic in there and say, write me a speech and then go deliver that? Absolutely not. They're terrible, but they can help unstick, your thought process or check for certain things or help you define things. So yeah, I think it's a tool.
Chat GPT likes to talk about the tapestry of our lives. I have seen that pop up in like 5 responses for totally unrelated things. So I agree, it is a tool. Julie, was there another one?
Sure. Sandy, have you been successful in engaging your clients at the Department of Defense and TEDx talks? I think this would be a more challenging sell at national security or government agency that tends to be more conservative, and where messaging must also be more precise. Or so precise. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, my time in DoD was my last corporate job. I actually have a consulting job now with NCIS that I can't talk to you about. but my clients have not come from DoD. Some of them do have military background. I have coached a couple of speakers that were in the Department of the Navy and Department of the Army, but I didn't necessarily recruit them myself through DoD. And we go through all the rules and regulations and do's and don'ts and things you can talk about and things you shouldn't talk about and all that kind of thing. But I found most of my speakers through Toastmasters and through my networking groups.
Got it. I'm going to kind of speed things along because I'm watching our time and we've got a couple of questions to get through here. Catherine, this one is a big one for you, especially for our audience who typically attends our lunch and learns. Part of what you do as a coach is getting scientists through the communication process. How do they distill their complex ideas? So can you briefly touch on how you prepare your SMEs to handle difficult questions, and if there's any difference that in prepping them to talk to the media? So how do you distill complex ideas? How do you prepare them for difficult questions? And does that differ when they're speaking to the media? It's big,
Yes,
I know.
Yeah. So, how do we break down complex ideas? It goes back to questions. I just say, what does that mean? What do you mean? How does that work? And it generally will get on their nerves a little bit, but I'm okay with that. Because my job is to help them crystallize an idea around something so that someone else can understand it and give them what they want. Because usually that they're asking for money, they're asking for support, they're asking for something. So they've got to be able to explain it in a way that matters and to say, what is the impact of this research or this new development or this thing we want to try, this new process? And if I can get them to talk about the impact and then break that down and break it down some more and break it down some more, we can get there. And then I will write something out. I actually did this with a client in a seminar a while back. I listened to what they said and then I wrote it down and I said, is this a lie? I always get them to fact check. And they'll be like, no, actually, good. Wow, that's what we do. And so as much as the process may be painful for them, the payoff is worth it. And then it's successful when they get what they want at the end, because they've been able to explain this, very specific thing in a way that a general or a more general audience can understand.
And how about prepping them for the media?
Definitely a huge fans of, I write down the questions I would ask them as a reporter. and then write down talking points for them. And, you know, if we have the opportunity, we like to go through those with them and coach them for real. But if nothing else, here are the tough questions I would ask you as a reporter. And that's where that training really comes in handy. And then, you know, come up with ways to do it and talk about bridging statements and when to use them and when not to use them. And that's pretty much true of any audience, whether it's the media or if you think you're going into a hostile audience in some other way, whether you're breaking bad news as an HR person to a room full of people. What are the questions? And to be prepared to answer those, because people do have a right to know what things are, and to make it seem like either the audience or the media, they're not the enemy, they're doing their job. It's their job. And so that's another piece, I think, of our job as PR people, is to help build that bridge there. Like, the media is not just there to serve you. We've got to help them do their job as well.
Absolutely. That's a great segue into Sandy's focus on increasing empathy. You got to have empathy for the media and the difficult question askers. They're people too. Sandy, how can you increase, how can increasing your emotional intelligence and in particular self-awareness help you to clearly articulate your message and or respond to difficult questions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jessica. Have you all heard that quote? If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. You heard that? Yeah. Well, the quote that I use is, if you're in the right room, you're the smartest person. So when you get selected to speak anywhere, and in particular when you're giving a TEDx talk, you have 10 minutes to get your message across. And I put a comment in the chat earlier, your voice inflection, your tone, and your pace can either demonstrate your authenticity, which Catherine talked about, or your insecurity. So from a self-awareness perspective, when you get on a stage, whether it's in person or virtual, you better damn well believe you deserve to be there. Because if you don't have belief in yourself, then nobody else in the audience is going to buy a word that you say, right? So if Catherine and I were to come on this panel and be like, well, you know, I mean, I guess you could do this, maybe try that, you know, I mean, how would that come off to all of you versus us like commanding our virtual platform here and speaking with confidence about what it is that we believe will help all of you to become better speakers?
Wonderful.
So self-belief and mindset are huge.
Yeah. Wonderful. We've got one more question for the two of you before we open it up to questions. So we're back on track. So thank you, ladies, for going with me on that one. Before we open it up, I know that both of you feel very passionate about helping young professionals and women in male-saturated industries. What advice would you give to someone looking for a leg up in presenting their ideas? Sandy, let's start with you.
Well, I think what I just talked about speaks a lot about it as well. Again, having that confidence, owning your opinion, being willing to speak up, and knowing that your voice should be heard and could be heard. And there's, Jessica knows my hot button. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but she did not say I worked in male-dominated industries. She said I worked in male-saturated industries. I'm very particular in the book that I just wrote that she talks about, the chapter on return on empathy talks about my journey in male-saturated industry. So it was an industry that was saturated with males, but it didn't mean that it was dominated by them. And it didn't mean that there wasn't a place for females. So I really encourage, I just was at a conference over the weekend at Colorado School of Mines here in Golden, Colorado, for the Society of Women Engineer and Girls Lead the Way. I participated in a lot of conferences and supporting, including not only professionally, but personally. I have two daughters. One's going to be a nurse and one's going to be a forensic scientist. So I promoted at home and at work. But just believing in yourself, and then again, finding those advocates and sponsors that can help you along the way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Catherine, how about you? What advice would you give people to get a leg up in their career?
This comes back to my mantra of practice, practice, practice.
Mhm.
This is useful in your career as well. I had a boss early on when I was just a new baby manager in the newsroom, which can be a real tough transition from in the newsroom to running the newsroom. And he was huge on practicing the tough conversations. Like he'd pull you in his office and he's like, you got to deliver this message. What are you going to say? And you'd say it. And he's like, okay, now here's why you're not going to say that. Try again, try again. And it was fantastic. I hated every minute of it, but it was fantastic to have a mentor like that who cared enough to not tell me what to say, but to let me learn step by step and to coach me and to give me honest feedback. And I remember a meeting so clearly where I was talking about something and this boss was next to me and somebody just started, it was not a pleasant conversation, let's just say. And I started to respond and he put his hand on my arm and he just went. And so I said nothing. And I was like, that is important, right? Know when to speak and know when to, as he later said to me, let him hang himself with his words. Just
Absolutely.
don't. So I think my advice is find a mentor who can help coach you in those conversations and situations that come up and who will take the time to practice with you. And it can be a peer, it can be someone above, it can be someone in a different generation that's younger than you as well. I do think that mentoring doesn't always mean up. Sometimes your mentor is new to the business. So that again, practice, practice, practice.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Now
that's a good. I just to comment on that from a self-regulation perspective, in emotional intelligence, we need to learn. Like I when I'm coaching people on this, I say the fact that you don't get along with everybody that you work with is not their problem. It's yours. Because you can't control how they react, right? So you need to learn how to thoughtfully respond versus emotionally react.
Yeah.
And the more that you emotionally react, the more that you break down the trust in relationships. So it's important to practice that.
Yeah. And I would say even sometimes we don't feel like we're responding emotionally. We're like, but I'm going back to the talking points. Yeah, but how are you feeling when you do that?
And what tone are you
tone and
using?
inflection. Exactly. So Catherine, before we open it up to questions, you wanted to mention something quickly about the tip sheet that everybody will be receiving.
Yes. So the tip sheet I'm sending out, it is really foundational. It is the basics. And I chose to do that. Bless Jessica, because she was so patient with me. I should have sent her this 3 weeks ago. And it just
Got it last night.
because I'm like, well, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure. And then, I don't know, yesterday morning, as I was working on this speech, it hit me as I was very overwhelmed working on the speech for that executive. I had to remind myself, just go back to the basics. You know what, where's your outline? Where are your thoughts? What are the messages? How do we do this connection? And then I was like, you know what? That's what I'm gonna share with everybody is just a sheet of the basics, because sometimes when you are overwhelmed and you have 9 other things to do, sometimes just looking at a sheet with the things you already know, but to just recenter yourself, kind of like when your GPS goes a little weird and you hit recenter. It helped me focus. So I hope it helps you focus as well.
Wonderful. Julie, we've got about probably 8 minutes before we've got to close up. So let's try and get as many of these questions answered. And Catherine and Sandy, I haven't asked you this, but if we have questions we don't get to today, would you be willing to write a quick little response to include in our email? Perfect. So Julie, have at it.
Sure,
Great.
no
Okay, we'll get started. So first question is, how about your thoughts on slides or notes for a 3-hour workshop? Slides and notes for that venue?
I would say yes. Yeah. I mean, I I would have an outline for sure, because I need to contain myself. Sometimes my thoughts, I want to make sure I only tell 2 stories and not 12. So I like that, just knowing who I am. If it's a longer format, I feel like I have tons of time. And then slides, I do think if it's just you for a 3-hour workshop and you're standing in front of people that whole time, as beautiful as you are, it's a little bit boring. Give me something else to look at.
Yeah, and my comment would be, I've given 2, 3, 4-hour workshops. There's, I would say, slides for sure, but more importantly, engagement and interaction. So I will do an exercise with them or something like that, where they're not just listening to me drone on for 3 hours, because nobody needs that in their life.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks. That ties really nicely into the next question. What about polls during presentations of any length? Thoughts on polls?
I haven't done them in person. I have done them through the Zoom room, and they're kind of nice depending on what the question is. And then you can actually share the results with people, and that might lead to more engagement and dialogue.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't like an over reliance on them. I think there are plenty more interactive ways to get your audience involved, but a poll here and there, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What about, this is kind of just a question. If there is, when we decided, talk versus speech, is there a length of time and audience that sort of helps you separate what's a talk versus a speech? Or how, again, kind of going back to the beginning of that, how would you define those?
Well, for me, I define, if you go to the TEDx website, you will never see them refer to a speech or a presentation there. So it is something that I just like discipline my speakers on. So they start talking about their speeches, and I correct them every time throughout our mastermind, until by the end they are now referring to it as a talk. So I would say from the TEDx definition, I like it. It's it's maximum of 18 minutes is kind of a talk. For a speech, I would look to like Toastmasters. I mean, for me, all the speeches that I've given, even when I give a presentation at a conference or whatever, I don't call it a speech, I call it a presentation. So a speech to me is something that is Toastmasters. And again, that could be, depending on your track in Toastmasters, could be any length of time. But it's more about the formality, I think, maybe, and the engagement. So. Yeah. Than it is the time.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. What are your thoughts on pre-recorded versus live presentations? So, there's a lot of people like live, but oftentimes the pre-recorded get you the best quality. Thoughts on that? And when would be the best time for either?
I've done both. 110% prefer live. I've sent pre-recorded. It's just, my passion for speaking comes from engagement and connection. And if I've recorded something and shipped it off, there's no opportunity for me to really engage with the audience in that scenario. So it's not my preference.
I would agree. I like that energy from a live interaction. Certainly you can do pre-recorded. Yeah, it might look better, but it will be lacking something.
Okay, thanks. What about resources for activities to use during longer, say 4-hour trainings? What are you've mentioned a couple. Any other thoughts on activities?
I'll let Catherine answer. I'm going to go grab a book from my shelf.
I'm going to say that, it really depends on the topic and the audience. And I know that sounds like, oh, such a lame answer, but it really is dependent on who your audience is, what your goals are. The most recent training I did was an all-day training, and I thought of something to do every hour. And if I couldn't get them out of their seat, and sometimes it was as simple as, we've got giant Post-it notes around the room with questions. Take your marker, your color-coded marker, and go answer those questions. Like, interactive doesn't have to be tech dependent. Another just a couple easy ones that come to mind: think, pair, share. If you've got a tougher sort of thing you want people to tackle, or you've got an audience that you don't think is going to be super willing to raise their hand and speak up right away, there's you can say, hey, in pairs, I'd love for you to, or threes or whatever, I'd love for you to discuss this thing and then come to a consensus, and then we will go around the room and discuss what you came up with. And that's a safer way to get people to interact on certain kinds of topics, or if, like I said, it's an audience that's, you know, generally just not sharers. So when there's safety in that little group. Okay, I thought about it, we paired up, and now we're going to share what we as a group think. So those are a couple of easy, low-tech things you can do.
Thanks, Catherine. Lena actually asked that question and said that the topic is leadership. Does that change your thoughts about some activities related to a leadership workshop?
How
Or
many
Sandy?
I'd love
hours?
to know
How
more.
many
Yeah,
hours do you have?
4.
Because I could go on for days. I went to grab, so Catherine's answer was spot on. It depends on your topic. You know, when I talk on emotional intelligence, I have an emotional intelligence activity kit. So I go through, and depending on the audience, I will choose an exercise from here and we'll do an engagement along that. Some other great ones around leadership, Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, if you're looking at team building. And he has a new one, The 6 Working Geniuses. There's another book out called 6 Thinking Hats by Edward De Bono. That's another good one for leadership. Like I said, I've got shelves of them. So
I want to interject one that I've seen, and it might help with inspiration. Sandy, you know Joe Esty. He's a local Tri-Cities trainer here, and he's taken a board game, and he uses a board game called Telestrations as a group activity on communication. So I've actually seen him do this, and it gets to be very engaging. So I would just add, maybe look to other areas, other creative ways to create activities for people. So Telestrations I have seen used in a 4-hour workshop, and it is really entertaining and engaging.
I looked for mine, but I can't find it. I have 2 thumb balls. They look like soccer balls. They're really, really soft and squishy. And when you're in a room, they have different themes. You throw them from one table to the next, from one person to the next, and wherever their thumb lands, they answer that question. Those are awesome for like interacting and icebreakers.
Julie, do we have time for one more quick question?
You know, actually, I'll just put the question out to Sandy. Maybe you could put it in the chat. We've had a couple more questions and inquiries about your mastermind class and about the cost for that. If you wouldn't mind putting some of that information, and Jessica, I will hand it back to you.
Wonderful. Well, while Sandy puts that in the chat, I am also going to put our February seminar registration link back in the chat box. I put it up at the beginning, but for those that would like to join us next month, as I mentioned, this is a redo from what was supposed to be our November workshop. So I hope to see many of you. And I do notice someone asked about the AI registration. We don't have that link ready to go yet, so keep an eye on your inbox. I'd like to personally thank Catherine and Sandy for joining us today. This has been lots of fun. It's interesting to see the similarities and some of the differences, and very helpful for all of us. If there were extra questions, Julie will get those over to me and to our 2 presenters so that I can hopefully include that in our follow-up email. So look for the video of today's presentation and their tip sheets in your inbox soon. And as always, we'd like to thank you for spending your lunch hour with the Mid-Columbia chapter of PRSA, and we will see you all next month. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.